At 3:42 in the afternoon, late September of 1973, in a neighborhood in Ohio, the screen door slipped from the oldest child's hand and slammed against the frame. The yellow school bus had just disappeared around the corner. A school bag dropped onto a kitchen chair, a coat slid nearly to the floor, and a sneaker lay tipped on its side beside the refrigerator. On the gas stove, 3 kernels of corn rested in a thin layer of oil at the bottom of an aluminum pot. The mother tilted her head. The first kernel popped. She pulled the towel from her shoulder, gripped the pot handle, and called toward the back door. "Wash your hands first. Don't touch the pot." The screen door slammed in 1973. The sound of popping corn, the knife in the peanut butter jar, and 3 hungry children after school. On the table, the breakfast knife still stood in the peanut butter jar. Half a loaf of white bread sat beside a jar of cinnamon sugar and a few celery stalks left from the night before. She had already started before the children could ask. She knew what was still in the house, and she knew exactly when hunger would arrive. The recipe box was pulled from the second drawer behind a roll of wax paper and a small pair of scissors. It had once been a Christmas cookie tin, its lid scratched until nearly all of the design had disappeared, one dented corner requiring a push from underneath before it would open. Inside, one note read, "Bread, butter, cinnamon. Toast until edges darken." Another said, "Popcorn. Do not lift lid early." More familiar tasks did not need to be written down. She listened to the popcorn, watched the color of the sugar, and cut the celery to fit comfortably in a child's hand. Recipe number 30 began when the third kernel popped. The remaining corn was poured in, the lid lowered, and the pot shook with short, steady motions. About 10 to 12 cents was enough for 3 or 4 children. The popping slowed. She tilted the lid away from her face, poured the popcorn into a stainless steel bowl, and tossed it with a small piece of butter. The unpopped kernels remained at the bottom. The youngest child always searched for them first. Recipe number 29 used 4 celery stalks, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, and a pinch of raisins, costing about 21 to 25 cents. She shook the water from the celery, cut it into short pieces, spread peanut butter into the grooves, and arranged the raisins in uneven rows. The oldest child chose the piece with the most ants, while she asked about a math assignment and pulled the towel from a chair. Recipe number 28 came from the slightly dry slice at the end of the loaf. Butter was spread all the way to the edges. Cinnamon sugar was sprinkled with fingertips, and the aluminum tray was slid into the oven. The cinnamon aroma appeared before the heat. The edges became crisp while the center stayed soft. 3 to 5 cents carried the children through the time before supper. The recipe box remained open. One corner of a card was caught beneath the lid. Tomorrow was Saturday, and on the counter there would be marshmallows, Rice Krispies, and a stick of butter slowly softening. The weakened tray in 1974 marshmallows, caramel, and hands sticky with sugar. On a Saturday morning in 1974 in Ohio, the smell of coffee still lingered in the curtains while 3 bicycles already lay on their sides in the yard. The ceiling fan turned slowly above a bag of marshmallows, a box of Rice Krispies, half a stick of butter wrapped in paper, and a metal baking tray scratched at all 4 corners. The mother took out the recipe box, sliding her thumb beneath the dented lid. A card cut from a cereal box carried an added pencil note, "Do not press too firmly." The card beside it read, "Caramel, keep children back." Its recipe number 27 cost about 75 cents and yielded enough to cut into 12 to 16 pieces for the children in the house and the ones who had just parked their bicycles in the yard. Butter melted over low heat. Marshmallows were added gradually to a narrow saucepan, softening from the bottom upward and stretching into white strands around the wooden spoon. When the cereal was folded in, the crackling sound faded beneath the hot sugar coating. She poured the mixture into a buttered tray, rubbed a thin layer of butter across her palms, and pressed until the surface remained slightly springy. The spoon was left beside the sink. A few minutes later, the cereal stuck to it had disappeared. Recipe number 26 began with a stainless steel bowl full of popcorn with all the hard kernels removed. Brown sugar, butter, and corn syrup simmered in a heavy-bottomed pot, costing about 75 to 80 cents for a large bowl. The bubbles rose slowly, and the caramel darkened beneath the path of the spoon. The moment the baking soda touched it, the mixture expanded nearly to the rim of the pot. The children stood at the table, listening to the caramel crackle as it met the popcorn. The aroma of brown sugar drifted through the back door before the sticky clusters of popcorn had time to cool. In 1975, recipe number 25 used about 60 to 70 cents worth of ingredients to make 10 to 12 popcorn balls. She buttered both hands, gathered handfuls of still warm popcorn, then pressed and rotated them slowly. Any ball that felt too hot was dropped back into the bowl. The broken pieces were gathered into the final ball. On the sheet of wax paper, each ball carried a different size, and a few dents from fingers that had reached too early. The Rice Krispies tray lost its first corner before it had cooled. 2 popcorn balls were hidden in a coat pocket. Mother folded the remaining clean wax paper and placed the recipe box back near the edge of the drawer. On Sunday evening, the glass serving plate reserved for guests would be taken down, and a snack would stand in the center of a room filled with even more people. The crowded living room in 1975 Chex Mix, cheese balls, and plates that never stayed full for long. On an autumn Sunday afternoon in 1975 in Ohio, the smell of hot butter and Worcestershire sauce had already traveled through the hallway before the first guest knocked on the door. 2 relatives' cars were parked outside on the porch side. In the living room, the father adjusted the antenna on the television and called toward the kitchen, "Is it clearer now?" In the kitchen, the mother pulled a tray of Chex Mix from the oven. Steam fogged her glasses. She stirred the cereal mixture from the edges toward the center, heard the doorbell ring, and slid the tray back inside. The recipe box stood open on the corner of the counter. One card read, "Chex. Stir every 15 minutes. Another carried only the line, "Ruth's Cheese Ball." She did not need a last name or an address. That pencil note was enough. Recipe number 24 cost about $1.70 to $1.80, enough for 8 to 10 people standing around the living room. Chex cereal, pretzels, peanuts, and small crackers were mixed in the largest bowl in the house. Melted butter was stirred together with Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and onion salt, then drizzled in circles over the mixture. 2 spoons lifted everything from the bottom, so the cereal squares would not crumble. Each time the oven door opened, the smell of seasoning drifted through the conversation. Children picked out the pretzels. Adults searched for the peanuts. The final crumbs were gathered by hand while she washed dishes. Recipe number 23 had been chilling since the night before. 2 packages of cream cheese, cheddar, dried onion, pecans, and seasonings brought the cost of the cheese ball to nearly $2, not including crackers. The mixture was scraped from the sides of the bowl, wrapped in wax paper, then rolled in ground pecans. On the glass plate, Ritz crackers were arranged in just enough quantity, while the remainder stayed in the box for refills. A small knife rested at an angle on one side. By the middle of the gathering, the round shape had been carved into a deep hollow. Recipe number 22 was prepared shortly before the guests arrived. The chilled celery snapped beneath the knife blade, and pimento cheese spread was pressed along the grooves. About $1 was enough for a platter easy to carry when every chair was occupied. The straightest pieces were arranged around the outside, while the softer stalks were kept in the kitchen for the children. The Chex Mix was replenished a second time. The stuffed celery was down to 3 short pieces. Mother wiped the edge of a serving plate, listened to coffee being poured, and watched to see which bowl was nearly empty. Beneath the refrigerator light still sat a container of sour cream. In the pantry, an unopened packet of onion soup mix waited for its turn. The dip ball in 1976 sour cream, onion sup mix, and the recipes print on the back of packages. In 1976 in Ohio, the doorbell rang nearly 40 minutes early while the mother was still wiping down the countertop. She recognized the car in the driveway, opened the refrigerator, took out a container of sour cream with the foil seal still intact from the middle shelf. The glass bowl reserved for guests was placed on the counter. The packet of onion soup mix sat behind the flour canister. Before tearing it open, she pulled out the recipe box and read the line written on an old card: "Add a little Worcestershire if available." Recipe number 21 required about 60 to 70 cents worth of ingredients, not including potato chips, and was enough to keep a few adults gathered around the table before finding their seats. Onion soup mix fell in brown streaks across the sour cream and slowly disappeared with each turn of the spoon. She pressed the dried onion pieces against the side of the bowl with the back of the spoon, tipped the Worcestershire bottle for a brief pour, and chilled the bowl for 15 minutes. When it was brought out, the onions were still slightly firm. Potato chip crumbs clung to the rim of the bowl, and a second bag was soon placed directly on the table. In 1977, recipe number 20 used frozen spinach, mayonnaise, sour cream, a packet of vegetable soup mix, and a round loaf of bread, costing about $2.55 to $2.80 for 8 to 10 people. The spinach was twisted inside an old towel until the water dripped into the sink only slowly. She folded it into the thick mixture, hollowed out the loaf, and tore the removed bread into pieces. The dip was spooned into the bread bowl only moments before serving. Once someone broke off the first piece, the bread bowl began to sink lower. Recipe number 19 carried traces of the American South. Hand-grated cheddar fell into the bowl in strands, pimentos were drained dry, and mayonnaise was added 1 spoonful at a time. About $1.40 to $1.60 created enough cheese spread to serve with Ritz crackers, wheat thins, or white bread. The recipe box noted, "Do not add too much mayonnaise at first." The fork caught strands of cheddar, while the knife left an orange streak along the edge of the plate. After the guests left, the 3 bowls held only crumbs, smears of dip, and the lowered remains of the bread bowl. Mother folded the top of the cracker bag closed and wiped a drop of sour cream from the lid of the recipe box. On the counter, sugar, butter, and corn syrup had already been set out. Sugar, butter, at low heat in 1977, the sweets that did not allow the cook to turn away for too long. Late October of 1977 in Ohio. 3 recipe cards were laid side by side beneath the kitchen light. It's one card marked with a cocoa stain near the edge read, "No bake. Boil 1 minute, no longer." The peanut brittle card reminded, "Watch the color, not just the clock." The corner of the cheese straws card was dusted with flour, where the pencil note had faded. "Butter must be soft, not melted." Outside on the porch, the wind rattled the screen door in its frame. The youngest child rested a chin on the table, while the oldest worked on homework, but kept looking toward the stove. Recipe number 18 began with a fingertip pressed into a piece of butter. The indentation remained while the edges of the butter held their shape. Finely grated cheddar was mixed with flour, salt, and a pinch of cayenne, costing about $1.20 to $1.30 for a batch large enough for days when guests expected. The dough was pressed into strips on a baking sheet. The first strip curved. Later strips grew straighter as the hand found the proper pressure. Some batches were dry enough to require a little extra softened butter. Some trays were removed too early. The straws cooled and softened and had to be returned to the oven. The lid of the tin snapped shut once the straws had completely cooled, and the aroma of cheddar escaped before the children pulled chairs closer to the cabinet. Recipe number 17 used about $1.15 worth of ingredients to make more than 2 dozen no-bake cookies. Sugar, butter, milk, and cocoa were cooked until the entire surface of the pot boiled evenly. Mother stopped answering questions, watched the bubbles rise around the edges, and counted exactly 1 minute. The pot was removed from the heat. Peanut butter and oats were stirred in quickly, and spoonfuls were dropped onto wax paper. The first cookies were round. The last ones were uneven, because the mixture thickened as it cooled. The telephone call that lasted too long had once caused an entire batch to dry out more than intended. The children still ate the crumbs that hardened first between the cookies. In 1978, recipe number 16 kept the cook close to the saucepan. Sugar and corn syrup changed from clear to golden, then to amber around the thin coating of syrup clinging to the spoon. About $1.25 to $1.30 produced a large batch of peanut brittle. Peanuts were added, followed by butter, vanilla, and baking soda. The mixture expanded and was immediately poured onto a buttered tray. One batch that remained on the heat for an extra 30 seconds developed a slight bitterness and was broken into pieces reserved for the adults. The candy cooled and cracked beneath the handle of a spoon. The most attractive pieces were set aside as gifts, while the thicker edge pieces stayed at home. Near the hinge of the recipe box, another cocoa stain had appeared. Beneath the next set of cards were 3 unusual ingredients placed together, along with a short reminder, do not overcook the liver. The platter that made guests pose their conversations in 1978 bacon, canned pineapple, stuffed mushrooms, and a party that did not need to be fancy. On a Saturday afternoon in 1978 in Ohio, the smell of hot bacon drifted through the living room amid football commentary and the sound of beer cans being opened. 3 cars were parked unevenly beneath the shade of a tree. In the kitchen, Mother cracked open the oven door, removed her steam-fogged glasses, and looked at the brown sugar bubbling beneath the tray of rumaki. The recipe box rested against the wall. The top card read, "Do not overcook the liver." Recipe number 15 used nearly $3 worth of ingredients to make more than 20 pieces for the father's relatives and co-workers. Chicken livers were patted dry, placed beside slices of water chestnut, and wrapped in bacon. Soy sauce and brown sugar were brushed lightly over each roll. Some pieces required the bacon to be stretched tighter, and some toothpicks broke during turning. When the tray came out of the oven, the bacon edges were crisp, the liver remained tender, and the water chestnuts kept a faint crunch. Guests who said they would try only one usually returned before the platter had cooled. Beside it, recipe number 14 gradually took shape from half a grapefruit wrapped in aluminum foil, cheddar and canned pineapple, costing about $2 for a large platter, that were threaded onto toothpicks and inserted from the top down along the sides. The pineapple had to be drained well so the cheese would not slide off. The misshapen cheddar cubes were set aside for the children, but that smaller plate always emptied first. When carried into the living room, the hedgehog-shaped platter caused small hands to gather around the table before anyone even called them over. Recipe number 13 was timed by the sound of the doorbell. White button mushrooms were wiped with a damp cloth, stems removed, and then filled with a mixture of butter, garlic, breadcrumbs, and Parmesan cheese. About $2.20 made nearly 20 mushrooms. The tray went into the oven only when the first guest arrived. Butter still bubbled beneath the mushroom caps. The filling edges turned golden, and the hot juices inside forced people to take slow bites. By the end of the evening, sauce-stained toothpicks lay on paper plates. The grapefruit gradually showed through empty spaces, and one corner of the tray held only Parmesan crumbs. A woman stepped into the kitchen to ask for the rumaki recipe. The mother turned over the card marked with a soy sauce stain. In the corner of the kitchen, the slow cooker had begun releasing the aroma of grape jelly and chili sauce. The recipe cards that were copied by hand in 1978 grape jelly, a fondia pot, and the fish mold brought down only when guests were coming. On the morning before Thanksgiving in 1978, the Ohio kitchen could still clearly hear the sound of running water from the bathroom. Mother took the recipe box from the bottom drawer, where it rested between a roll of aluminum foil, wooden clothespins, and a pair of sewing scissors. The lid popped open, carrying with it the scent of old paper, vanilla, butter, and dried onions. She flipped past the meatballs card written on the back of an advertisement, the fondue card with a pinhole in one corner, and the salmon mold card marked with a clear gelatin stain. Those recipes had passed through many hands before coming to rest in this drawer. Recipe number 12 required about $3 to $3.45, enough for 10 to 12 people. Frozen meatballs struck the bottom of the slow cooker with a dry sound. A block of dark purple grape jelly was spooned into the center, and chili sauce was poured over the top. After many hours on low heat, the two colors blended into a reddish-brown sauce clinging to the meatballs. She tested one meatball, cut it in half on a small plate, then blew on it before handing the remaining half to the child standing beside her. The card contained only 3 lines because people who heard the recipe usually had to copy it down before believing no ingredients were missing. Recipe number 11 brought the fondue set down from the upper cabinet to the table. Gruyere, Emmental, white wine, and French bread cost about $5 to $6 for 6 to 8 people. Inside of the pot was rubbed with garlic. The cheese was added by handfuls and then stirred in a figure-8 motion. One long fondue fork missing its colored tip had been wrapped with red tape. Whenever bread slipped from a fork, the entire table leaned toward the same pot, where a darker golden layer slowly formed along the bottom. In 1979, the copper fish-shaped mold was taken down from the wall. Canned salmon, cream cheese, mayonnaise, and gelatin became recipe number 10, costing nearly $3. The mixture was pressed into the tail and fin sections and chilled overnight. The following morning, dipped the bottom of the mold into warm water, inverted it onto a serving plate, and tapped twice. A soft thump sounded. Only then did the family look away from the edge of the mold. After the evening ended, a drop of dried cheese remained beside the instruction, stir in a figure-8 motion. The sauce stain still marked the edge of the meatballs card. The recipe box kept both the recipes and the handwriting of the people who had once read them aloud. The dishes that left the kitchen in 1979 mason jars, wax paper, the station wagon parked in the driveway. On a summer morning in 1979 in Ohio, the 2 mason jars lightly tapped against each other inside a paper bag as the mother set them beside a metal lunchbox with a dented corner. Outside in the driveway, the rear door of the station wagon stood open. Father pressed a cooler between 2 bags of clothing, while the wind repeatedly lifted one corner of a road map spread across the vehicle's hood. In the kitchen, the recipe box stood open beside a bag of sugar. The pinwheels card read, "Roll the night before, slice in the morning." Another card held a dried drop of honey near the edge. Recipe number 9 cost about $1.90 to $2.40 for one large jar of granola. Oats were coated with honey, oil, sunflower seeds, and nuts, then spread in a thin layer on a baking sheet. The portion near the edges browned first, so every 15 minutes she stirred the mixture from the outside toward the center. Raisins were added only after the oats had cooled slightly. In the car, the children poured granola into their palms. The honey held a few clusters together, but oat crumbs still fell into the seat crevices and remained there until the end of the trip. Recipe number 8 began with peaches and apples that had softened. The bruised portions were cut away, and the remainder was slowly cooked, pureed until smooth, and spread into a thin layer. About 90 cents to $1.25 produced one tray of fruit leather. The oven remained at a low temperature from morning until afternoon. The edges dried first while the center remained sticky. The fruit no longer clung to a fingertip but could still bend. She cut it into strips and rolled them with wax paper. The rustling sound of the paper came from the back seat before the car had even left town. Recipe number 7 was prepared the night before. Softened cream cheese was spread over tortillas, then topped with green onions, black olives, and leftover ham. About $1.55 to $2.40 made enough for one large container. The rolls were wrapped tightly, chilled overnight, and sliced the next morning. The knife was wiped after every few cuts so the white, green, and black rings would not smear together. The best slices were arranged around the outside, while the misshapen pieces were placed in the center of the container. Mother set the container on top inside the cooler and pulled a bottle of soda away from the lid before it could crush it. The granola jar was passed to the back seat. The fruit leather rested inside a paper bag. The pinwheels traveled with the family to the park and the ball field. When the station wagon pulled out of the driveway, the kitchen still carried the scent of cooked fruit and toasted honey. The recipe box remained open a little longer before finally being closed. When the kitchen began to grow quieter, 3 dishes on the border between homemade and store-bought, 1979. In early December of 1979, darkness arrived before all the grocery bags had been unpacked onto the kitchen table. Inside were cookies, packaged popcorn, granola bars, and several boxes labeled "Ready in Minutes." The mother put them away in the cupboard and then pulled out the recipe box to find the cheese straws card. She read one line, looked at the clock, and heard a child in the living room asking where the other sneaker was. The father would be home late. The card was returned to the box. A package of store-bought cookies was opened instead. Recipe number 6 still appeared whenever the church held a gathering. 1 dozen eggs, mayonnaise, mustard, and seasonings cost about $1 to $1.10, producing 24 deviled egg halves. The shells were removed under cold running water, and a few whites lost small pieces and were arranged in the back row. The yolks were mashed through the tines of a fork and mixed until soft enough to be spooned back in using 2 small spoons. On the drive to church, the tray rested on the mother's lap. As the car rounded a curve, its 1 egg half slid out of its indentation. She put it back, reshaped the filling with a fingertip, and continued holding the tray with both hands. Recipe number 5 began with leftover ham from Sunday dinner. The dry outer portion was sliced thin, fed through a hand-cranked grinder that squeaked and rattled, then mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickles, onion, and mustard. About $1.20 to $1.55 made enough ham spread for 1 bowl, served with white bread the following day. Meat caught in the grinder shaft had to be pushed out with the tip of a spoon. Disassembling and washing the machine took nearly as long as preparing the spread itself. Recipe number 4 used Chex cereal, chocolate, peanut butter, butter, and powdered sugar, costing about $2 for 1 large bowl of puppy chow. The hot portion was stirred by the mother over low heat. The rest was assigned to 2 children. The chocolate-coated Chex was poured into a brown paper bag, the top folded over 3 times. The older child held the top, while the younger hugged the bottom. They shook it until powdered sugar coated every cereal square in white and drifted onto their sleeves. The 3 cards were returned to the recipe box. Their corners curled and their rows uneven. Beneath them was another card marked with cheddar stains and 3 words: sausage, cheese, Bisquick. 3 cards near the ballon of the recipe box. The final dish does not remind people of the recipe. First, late in the winter of 1979, the light above the sink remained on, after the television in the living room had already been turned off. 1 child slept on the sofa, a thin blanket stopping at the knees. In the kitchen, the mother washed the last spoon, dried her hands, and took the recipe box from the second drawer. The lid had acquired another scratch. She flipped through the cards with curled corners and stopped at 3 cards near the bottom. Its recipe number 3 began with pairs of Ritz crackers arranged on wax paper. Peanut butter was spread just thick enough so it would not squeeze out when the 2 crackers were pressed together. The chocolate melted over low heat and was stirred continuously to keep it from thickening. About $1.25 to $1.50, made nearly 20 pieces for unexpected visitors. The first sandwiches carried a thicker coating of chocolate, while the last ones were dipped only halfway. A fingerprint left on one still glossy piece was covered again with the edge of a spoon. Recipe number 2 used bacon wrapped around water chestnuts, secured with toothpicks, and drizzled with brown sugar mixed with soy sauce. Nearly $3 was enough for more than 24 pieces. In the oven, fat dripped onto the tray, sugar bubbled into a dark sauce, and the water chestnuts still retained their crunch when bitten. One piece burned on the bottom was set aside. Father walked by and took it before the serving platter, for guests had even been found. The final card simply read, sausage, cheese, Bisquick. On Christmas morning, the mother grated cheddar into a bowl, divided cold sausage into pieces, and mixed everything by hand. Flour clung to her fingers before the sausage fat caused the mixture to come together. If it seemed too dry, she added milk 1 spoonful at a time. Nearly $2.85 produced about 30 sausage balls, enough for children coming down the stairs and for adults who would return for a second helping. In the oven, cheddar bubbled around the edges. The smell of sausage drifted through the hallway. A hand reaching toward the still-hot tray was met by the gentle tap of a spatula handle across the back of the hand. The recipe box was put away. Its one corner of a card still protruded beneath the lid. She noticed it and left it there. People do not remember how long they stood in that kitchen. They remember who was there when they walked into it.